So I lost my job at the bank on the first day. A woman asked me to check her balance, so I pushed her over. So I thought I'd start off with a lighthearted joke. I actually really like that one. I spent a little while this morning looking up dad jokes, and that one made me chuckle. I have another one. My boss told me I'd have a good day, so I left. I find those to be really funny. But anyway, today's video is going to be a cinematography style breakdown on a recent spec project I did with Danny Gevirtz, the Bose headphone commercial. So my hope for this video is to kind of just create a well-rounded, more cinematography focused video for this specific project. For those of you that follow Danny, he has a behind the scenes out, he has a breakdown video out. So there's a lot on this specific project that's already out there. So you've seen a lot of the behind the scenes. So hopefully in this video, I'll be able to answer some questions that I saw in some of the comments based on the cinematography. And hopefully you have a better understanding of how we approached this project and how we were able to accomplish this look. So for those of you that have seen the behind the scenes, you know that we went with a very simplistic approach. And that seems to be the style that Danny likes as a director. And that's something that I have to adjust to as a DP, is adjust to the style that the director is looking to have on his set. As a DP, I think your style isn't a one-size-fits-all for every project. I think it's important for you to be adaptable, for you to understand the scope, the scale, and understand the sandbox that you are working within. Understand the limitations that the production has given you for this specific project. Work within those means. Obviously, try to maximize it as best as you can to be able to deliver the best product. Every project will have its own sandbox, regardless of if it's a $10 million project or a $3,000 project. It's going to have some limitations. I think another aspect to go along with that is the idea of creating a project start to finish. I think as a DP, when you're starting, I think something that I struggled with was wanting to create passion projects, but not with the intention of creating a final piece. But I was just, I just wanted some good looking images. I want some great looking frames. And I think some of my passion projects struggled because I didn't fully flesh out the story, but I was going in with the intention of just getting good frames. And I think that's okay if that's what your intention is and you know that going in. But for this project, and specifically working with Danny and working with the director and having a team and, it being a bit more of a full-fledged project, even though it's a passion project, the goal isn't to get just beautiful frames. The goal is to complete the project and have a piece to be able to share with the world. That is the ultimate goal. And I think that goes along with understanding the limitations and playing within your sandbox. Is you could spend unlimited amount of time to light a scene. You could be able to get the best looking frames, perfect, but you might not get all the shots that are needed for the edit. You might not be able to make the day, you might go overtime. Whereas if you understand the limitations, you understand the scale and the scope of the work, you're able to know what you're able to do in that day to get it to look as good as you possibly can. And I'm excited to share with you just a little bit about how we approached it and some of the lights and some of the specs and technical stuff that we used for this Bose spec project. So let's start diving in. So to glance over the camera technical side of things, we shot on the Sony Venice and Togina Vista Primes as our A-cam. We shot on the Sony FX3 and the 24-70 G Master. We also shot on another Sony FX3 with 24-70 G Master. So we had 3 cameras and each of those had a very specific purpose. The Venice was used as our main A-cam, so if we were doing handheld rigs, sticks, anything with dialogue, anything that we were able to control a little bit more, where it didn't have to be more of a specialty shot. The other cameras, the FX3s, we used one that was lived 100% on the gimbal, and for the one shot where we were tracking the main player, that was 100% done on the gimbal and the FX3. And the one other shot where we push really quickly into his face, that was also done on the FX3. And the C-Cam FX3 was used as the overhead rig for the bathroom toilet scene. That was the easiest way to accomplish those without having to do Steadicam and without having to rig a big overhead setup for the Venice. So that was just us understanding the limitations of what we had, the crew and the equipment, and being able to maximize the time and be able to get all the shots that we needed. Since the FX3 and the Venice match really perfectly, And we did this a lot on I Think I'm Sick. We did this on I Like Your Pants. We recognize that there really isn't a huge difference between those two cameras, especially if you can get the exposure in a good place. It's really about trying to get a really solid color grade in. All right, so let's start diving into some of these frames and looking at how we were able to accomplish the look for this project. We're gonna start with the hallway locker room scene where the two characters meet. And this is our first opening sequence in the commercial. So the first shot that we're gonna look at is this opening shot, and it's mainly focusing on the girl here. One thing I wanna notice is just kind of this, softer kind of contrast here. And it's naturally due to the fact that, she's next to this locker right here that's inherently creating some contrast. And then, he is blocking a lot of this open space in the frame where we have a light, which is a tube back here, giving a little hair light. And we also have another tube camera right, and that is creating a bit more of a side key light. And even though in the hallway, we're dealing with those overhead fluorescents, we wanted to kind of wrap it a little bit more sidey to make it a little bit more pleasant for her face and to be able to catch it in her eye a little bit. And I also want to note with her, this isn't our main over the shoulder for her. This was just the opening shot. So moving on to the next shot of her we have here, this is where we see her actually speak. This is the dialogue part. And something I noticed within Danny as well is it seems like he likes to do a lot of nearsighted shooting, meaning, you're shooting into the key light that's over here. Instead of shooting far-sighted, you're shooting into the key light. And naturally, as a DP, you hear a lot that you want to shoot far-sighted. You want to be, shooting into the shadow side here. She takes up about half of the frame right here. What do we have here? We have, one extra, two extras, and we have some lights in the background. Now, the only reason this works is because we only had two extras and they were PAs. But if we were to shoot this way, that would have revealed the entire other side of the hallway over here, which means that we don't have enough extras to show that it looks like it's a busy hallway. We don't have enough light to make it look like it's matching. So we wanted to keep everything as consolidated as possible within this frame. So that's a really great way to, I guess, understand, again, the limitations with extras. And I think another thing to note is it was a really, these lockers created some nice leading lines towards her face here. And it kind of just made your eye draw to this location over here towards her face. And because we only lit our main subject, which was her, the level difference is a little bit higher here and a little bit lower down here. So your eye, again, naturally draws to her face rather than the background. But it's great to see these background lights, these overheads, because it's kind of a motivator to use as a wrapping key light. Even though they're way back in the background, you recognize and within your head that a hallway has those overhead fluorescents and this light is natural. And in terms of the lighting itself, we went a very simplistic approach with two Nanlite Pavo tubes, and of course I used my pool noodles. For those of you that aren't familiar with that technique, it's something that I've implemented a lot lately, and it's for me, I find that the tubes, whether they're Astera tubes, Pavo tubes, the light itself is going through this like plastic material. So I always thought that there is inherently always this kind of like sheen. Because it's a soft light, it's soft, but there's always this like shine or sheen because of the plastic. And I wanted to try to make it look a little bit more organic, and I wanted to spread the light a little bit more. So I saw this trick from an ASC DP, and it was just pool noodles. And I was like, why is nobody talking about it? Like, this is such a unique, cheap way to be able to spread the light and make it soft and make it way more organic looking. So I ended up purchasing a set of white pool noodles, cutting them to the size of the tubes and using those as a sort of diffusion. But note that that cuts the level drastically, the intensity, but it also makes it way more soft and it spreads the light a lot more. So I would definitely recommend checking out those pool noodles. If you want to take a look at those, they're in the description below. They're a great, cheap, affordable way to add some extra diffusion to your tubes. All right, so moving on, we're gonna be in the locker room now with the football players, and we're gonna start off with our main hero shot here. What you'll notice is there is a really nice wrapping key light here, and you get a little Rembrandt lighting on his cheek, and you get a nice eye light that sneaks in there. I also want to note that something else that really makes his image pop is down here. You get these little like highlights, these little hits of light. You get this little hair light right here. All of those I really feel make the image look way better, way more professional, because if you were to just, darken this and it would just be black, it would just be like a void in his face. But I feel like this still shows the location and it still makes it feel a little bit more immersive. And I think that is part of the reason I really like this image a lot, is because of those background hits, whether they're bleachers, or the seats. I forget what you call them. Bleachers, seats, benches. I think these are the benches background. And having light hit those and bounce off just create a nice little light, nice little hit in the background. And just having a nice hair light here is a really great way to separate his hair from the background. I will note that I think the contrast back here is a little bit much. I think it's a little too much, but I also don't mind it either because we are trying to focus on his face and his emotion. So anything extra might be a distraction. But here we just added a little bit of contrast. But for our main key light, we used two. We used the Amaron F22C. I had that going through a softbox, and I had that also going through a 4x black silk diffusion. Now, this was a question that I saw a lot in the comments. What was that diffusion that Carlo was using? It's a black silk, and this isn't something you see very often, and a lot of people have mixed reviews on it. I've read on it, I see gaffers have mixed reviews on it, DPs have mixed reviews on it. Some people love it, some people don't see the use for it. And this comes down to what your particular style is at DP and what you want to try and experiment with. And I've tried to experiment with this diffusion here and there, and I found that for certain scenarios, especially when we're trying to control the light as much as possible, the black silk is a great way to add diffusion, which is like another type of softening of the light, because the Amaron already has a softbox, so that going through a 4x spreads the light, makes it a bigger source, and adds a second layer of diffusion. But because it's black and not white, it limits the amount of bounce and return that you get from the light hitting sources in front of it. When you're using a white silk or anything that's white, light is going to bounce or reflect off of it. When you use something that's black, light seeps into it and does not bounce or reflect. So that to me makes it a way more controlled light, while also adding a bunch of extra softness to it and spreading and making the source a lot bigger. So that's why I went with the 4x black silk. To wrap that light, I used a pavo tube with a pool noodle, and I'm a big fan of that cove lighting style. And technically, I wouldn't say this is like the traditional cove lighting that Roger Deakins does, but essentially cove lighting is just a wrapping light in varying intensity. So the F22, which was furthest away from the camera, more sidey on him, that was at a higher intensity, and the tube that was more frontal was at a way lower intensity, just to be able to wrap on the other side of his nose and his cheek, be able to get a little bit of an eye light. So utilizing both of those lights as our main key lights was our kind of game plan and our formula to be able to accomplish this look throughout a lot of the different scenes. So what's really cool about this one too is you get these overheads here, and you see that they wrap on his face, which make it seem like it's natural. But when in reality, I have the lights in the background actually illuminating his face. I also want to note that on this side of the room over here, there were a bunch of fluorescents, but I turned off all of those lights to be able to create this contrast here. And for this shot, we did handheld, and we were moving really fast, kind of match his emotion because he's screaming, he's going crazy. So the handheld really gave us that emotion, that feeling, and looking up at him, it's almost like that powerful feeling, like he's leading the group, he's trying to take charge. So that was kind of our ambition going into that particular scene. And I think it came across really well because it was used a lot in the edit, and his delivery was absolutely amazing. Moving on to this particular shot, this is where we first started to introduce the gimbal, I believe. And we did this long tracking shot, and we had these overhead fixtures on. And I believe in the beginning, we were trying to play with Do we keep them off? Do we flick them on at a certain point? Do we try to introduce like movement of light? But at the end, we ultimately decide to just keep the light on throughout this entire scene. And this was used as our motivator to illuminate the subject here. And as he's walking through the crowd of his team, I had a tube overhead just illuminating a little bit more of his hair, his background, just to be able to fill in a little bit, just so it didn't fall to darkness as much as we wanted. We wanted him to be illuminated in this scene. The other thing I want to note too is that we're at a slightly lower angle, kind of looking up at him, and similar to what we talked about before with the other guy, we want to create this kind of hero looking frame. So instead of looking down on him, we wanted to look up at him kind of as this heroic figure. And lastly, with this scene, you'll notice that there's a little bit of background light, and I believe all we had in the background over here was that aperture f22, kind of just spreading across the background, just creating a little bit more ambient light. All right, so moving on to the puke scene, a standard in Danny's videos. Here, what's really awesome that we did was try to compose this as symmetrical as we possibly could, and we wanted to get it as high as we could to be able to get all of this depth here, here, and here. You see, the height, I think, is what really makes this shot cool, because it's almost like it's entrapping him within these walls. If we went way closer as an overhead, I don't think it would have gave the same effect. But the key here was trying to get everything as symmetrical as possible. And here we just had the FX3 on the C-stand boom arm overhead, no lighting except for the overhead that were built into the bathroom. So this shot I think is really special only because I was sitting on a toilet trying to get this shot. And that's the commitment of being a DP, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes you just gotta straddle a toilet. What can I say? Gotta get the job done. But I think this shot really works because, again, we're shooting into the shadow side here, and the overhead fixture is, on this side of the stall, and it's giving him a nice return here and giving him a nice eye light as well. All right, so the last thing we're gonna be talking about is this kind of dream sequence here. And this was a lot of fun actually, because the music, if you watch the video, the song itself is like a total vibe. And we played it the whole time during the shooting, and it's just like I think Danny at a certain point had everyone dancing, and it was just like a really cool environment. And how we were able to accomplish this look was super low budget, and I think it's a matter of just maximizing the tightness of the frame and not really shooting major wides. Once you start shooting major wides is when you're gonna have to start introducing a lot more art production design, better lighting, bigger lights, and it's gonna have to be a lot more interesting and dynamic. But we kept everything very tight in mediums and close-ups to be able to maximize the lack of certain things in the scene. So for this particular shot, we're gonna talk about this real quick, which is our practical in frame. And those are string lights that are on the background. And those are what's used as bokeh in the background, but also as our motivating key light. So similar to the locker room, we use the same exact setup. We use the Amaron F22C going through the black silk. And we had those coming in this direction as our main key light. And why did we have it in this direction? Because we're shooting from the shadow side. We're also using these string lights as our motivating key light. That is the point. Use practicals in your frame to motivate your key light. You also notice that our shadow side kind of starts a little bit further down his face, and we did wrap the key light a little bit more to be able to fully hit his face here. And we could have went a little bit more contrasty, but I think the goal was to be able to see his face a lot more in this one, especially because we're in slow-mo and increasing, the frames, the image gets darker, so we had to make sure there was enough level on his face. So the other thing in this frame that you'll notice is this light back here. And that is what we call the $9 Amazon disco light type of thing, laser light. Yeah, Danny sent me a picture. He's like, I think you'll like this thing. I was like, yeah, let's use it. I think it's gonna be sweet. So we ended up using it, and that mixed in with haze gave us these really cool beams, these cool, honestly, it raised the production value of the images because the lights were moving. With the haze created these beams, and it makes it look like such a higher production value image, even though the light that we used was $9 off of Amazon. One thing that I will note in this shot that I think could be improved is this here, the shadow side. I think we could have definitely filled in a little bit or maybe added a little bit more color contrast. I know that we had 2 pavo tubes. One was set, I think, back here. And I think we did have it on like a teal or maybe like a purple. But initially we had it at a pretty high intensity. So this area here was way more purple or way more blue. But we ended up toning it down and just creating a way more kind of natural shadow side. But I think we could have definitely upped up the shadows a little bit and maybe added a little bit more of a top light. But all in all, I think this is a great looking image. And, you know, with the black satin, it creates this kind of like haze. It looks like this glow back here, which helps with the filtration, and just having haze in the room helps create that atmosphere. In terms of camera, I believe we shot this on the 35, and I know we stuck with the 35-50 for majority of the project. We didn't really want to go way too wide, and we didn't want to go way too tight either. So those were kind of our favorite lenses for this project. So looking at this image, I think there could be some improvement here, to be honest, but I think it's still a pretty good looking image for, you know, what we had. And again, you start to see these bulbs, you start to see these party lights back here, and we're using that as our motivating key light. And honestly, yes, it doesn't really match perfectly. It's not, the key light itself is wrapping her face way too much for it to look like it's coming from those bulbs. But it's a dream sequence, and I thought that it didn't necessarily need to match perfectly. I just needed to be able to make it look like it lived in the same world and have a good amount of warmth on her face, because that was the feeling that we were going for. So again, we just switched the key light and we wrapped it from this side. The one thing that I think that we definitely could have improved upon was raising the level here on this side. I think it falls too much in the shadows. I think there could have been something interesting back here. But I know that we do have the 9 light back here spreading. It might be just, you know, this particular frame that isn't hitting as hard. I could have picked a better frame, but I think if you're looking frame by frame, second by second, I think that could have been a little bit more. But I also don't mind that there is this contrast level. I think I actually, you know, part of me loves it. Part of me thinks it could be improved. I think, you know, it's all about taste. So I think this shot's pretty cool because we have the 9 light, you know, right here, and we kind of just have that, you know, haloing her essentially with the haze. And similar, we have the F22 camera right, you know, wrapping as our key light here. And you see we have a nice eye light on her as always. But here, I think this is great. I really have no comments on this shot. In terms of camera movement, the goal for the camera was to be still and have them move within the frame, because we're shooting in slow-mo. We wanted them to move and not the camera, which gave it that kind of dreamier effect. And moving on to the next shot, we're going to see, you know, another hero shot of him here. Essentially, it's like the same thing as the hero shot that we saw before, except that we start to see a little bit more, you know, interest in the ground here, which I think is pretty cool. Coming from the 9 light, you start to see some blue again coming from the 9 light, and you know, this the string lights. And the thing that you'll notice about the string lights, actually you won't notice, but I'm going to tell you, is that we move the string lights depending on the composition. In the first shot, if I can go back to it, the string lights are way higher. You see how high they are compared to, you know, his face. But in this frame, you'll notice that the string lights are way lower, even at this specific composition where we're looking down on him and his face is a lot lower in the frame. Technically, the lights should be up here, but we move them down to be able to get them in frame because we like them in the background. We like the bokeh in the background. So that's just like one of those movie magic, fake it tricks, is just adjusting, and nobody's ever gonna notice that unless someone says it. So I'm saying it now, and you're probably gonna notice now, but who cares? Let's start talking some shees. This shot, I definitely think is one of the shots that could be improved the most out of anything that we shot in this particular project. So background looks good. You know, you have your string lights back here, you have your 9 light back here, you know, hitting, you have the haze, it's good. You know, this is a really nice looking, you know, tone down here. Not that it's super important, but the issue with this shot is this is freaking dark. Way too dark, way too dark. There's no level, there's no contrast, there's nothing. we would have needed to do was add a top light and have it come down here. That would have gave us the level that we needed to be able to see her face and also see the headphones. That's a product. We needed to see that. But considering it was a spec project, not a legitimate commercial, we didn't have the time to do it. So we just moved as quick as we can. But this was a particular shot that Danny and I talked about afterwards that we reflected on and said that, yes, this one needed way more time and way more work. So yeah, I think it's okay to reflect on your work and say that, this one could have been improved upon because there's no definition here. It's just straight shadow. So I would have loved to have had more time on this and be able to add a top light, would add some level on her face. But that's how it goes. And you live and you learn, you try better for the next time. All right, so that's a wrap on the cinematography style of the Bose headphone spec commercial. Hopefully you found some value in it. Hopefully you learned a little bit, and hopefully I answered some of your questions in terms of the techniques and the technical side of some of the cinematography and the equipment used to make this look. So love this project. I think we did a really awesome job, and I'm very proud of it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it just as much as I did. And that's it. I'll see you guys next time. Have a great day. Peace out.